Okay, I think we can start. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this session on sustainable finance. We have two people online. Can you hear us all right? And can you see us okay? And Alberto, can you hear us and see us okay?
Yes, it's okay.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much for joining. The session on sustainable finance, if you followed the previous 2 days of our annual meetings, and indeed if you follow the research that we do at Bruegel, you will know that we care deeply about climate, about energy transition, about the finance of the energy transition and climate change. And the financing of it is actually a huge issue. How are we going to finance the investment needs, and how do we make sure that our investment needs are of the green type and they are on the sustainable track of the economy? And indeed, what is the next business model for Europe, and how are we going to finance that? We thought a dedicated session on the financing of the green transition, and financing of growth, I would like to say, is in order, and that is why we're having the session here today. I'm joined by three stellar panelists to discuss these issues from different parts of all the stakeholders. Let me briefly introduce you, and then we will go immediately to their initial comments. Alexandra Jour-Schroeder, welcome Alexandra. She is the Deputy Director General of DG FISMA in Brussels. Alberto De Paoli, who is the Chief Financial Officer in Enel. Thank you, Alberto, for joining. And here, physically in Brussels with us is Pierre Helbron, who is the Vice President of EBRD. So we've had a mix of different players, different stakeholders in the issue, and I'd like to hear from them their take on how to promote finance in a sustainable way in order to finance the green growth. We will start with 6-7 minutes of initial comments. We have a little bit of time, and also I would like to remind our audience that you can ask questions, and I encourage you to take this opportunity to pose questions to our very knowledgeable panelists by going into Slido and typing in BAM 21 finance. So without further ado, let me then give the floor first to Alexandra, who is going to tell us about the initiatives of the Commission and the agenda put here in Brussels. Alexandra, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, and a very good morning to all of you. I think, first of all, you said it already, I think it's very useful and important that you have chosen sustainable finance as one of the topics of the Bruegel annual meeting. As we all know, it is a very pressing topic and possibly become even more pressing in the months and years to come. It's a global challenge of our time, and we have to work together. I mean, I've checked a little bit again the figures, and indeed achieving a net zero greenhouse gas emission by 2020 requires massive additional investment. And this investment can not only come from the public sector, although it will certainly have to play its share, but the private sector also has a major role to play, and therefore sustainable finance has become such an important thing. I would say the times where it was a bit a niche object, a nice to have policy are really over. It's today a must-have in our efforts to address climate change, and indeed the clock is ticking. You have kindly given me the possibility to speak first in our panel, and my idea would be to briefly go through what we have already accomplished in the EU. I think it's on good track, although we certainly need to do more, and also a little bit where we want to go and what needs to be done. And then, of course, we will hopefully have a very interesting discussions. Of course, I could speak 6 or 7 hours of what we have done, but I try to be brief and only capture the major points. Let me start with the action plan the Commission set up in 2018 that were really our foundations. And this action plan has 3 building blocks. One, a classification system. The second element is a disclosure framework for non-financial and financial companies. And then there are several other investment tools, including, for example, benchmarks, standards, and labels. And I have to say a lot of work has gone into these 3 building blocks. And I think what's very positive is that we have very concrete deliverables. On the classification, I think this is possibly the most visible, but maybe also a bit the most controversial step. taxonomy. I think that was an impression some years ago, was only used in a quite scientific context, and certainly not the day-to-day language of bankers and brokers. But today it has become a key notion in sustainable finance. I have to say, the birth of the taxonomy regulation that is now in application since July last year was certainly not an easy, but a very necessary one. And from our side, we are firmly convinced that we need such a clear, transparent, science-based classification system, because it will provide corporates and financial market participants with a common definition of sustainability, therefore providing protection against greenwashing. We are also convinced that with the taxonomy we can significantly increase the potential that green finance offers, in particular for carbon-intensive sector. And this is a journey we have started with the regulation that needs to be implemented by a number of what we call in our EU jargon delegated act. We have started with a quite ambitious delegated act that addresses climate mitigation and adaptation, with a quite long list of investments that would be considered as addressing the climate mitigation and adaptation. For the moment, this is under scrutiny by member states and the European Parliament, and of course, we hope that the co-legislator is of the same opinion as we, that we need this long list to start with, and there will more to come. The second building block is about disclosure. We have established a mandatory disclosure regime for both non-financial and financial companies. Here again, we have done a major step with the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation that is in force now since March actually this year. Just in a nutshell, it requires market participants that offer investment products and financial services to report on both entity and product level on the sustainability risks and possible adverse impacts of their products. We have also made another proposal in this area that was adopted by the Commission in April, which is called the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. This instrument aims to ensure that companies report reliable and comparable sustainable information that investors and other stakeholders need. These disclosures, for example, include the impact of a company's activities on the environment, society, but also business financial risks faced by a company due to its sustainability exposures. And this is now also in negotiations between Council and Parliament. I mean, this directive will also need quite a number of detailed standards about this sustainability reporting. And we have already started a bit in working in parallel together with the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group. The third building block of the strategy, as I said, is a set of investment tools that would make it easier for financial market participants to align their investment strategies with our climate goals. There are quite a number of these tools. I will not go into all of them, but just to say that we have, for example, either EU climate transition benchmarks and the EU Paris-aligned benchmarks, which were created by such a EU regulation. We have now put on the table a proposal for a standard on a European green bond, and we are also still working on the extension of the EU eco-label to financial products. So with all these activities that have filled these three building blocks with life, we feel that our efforts to support sustainable financing are quite well accomplished, well underway, but it's certainly not something where we could say we have now done everything and it all is fine. And therefore, you will have seen that we have recently come up with a new strategy that also takes into account that from 2018 to today, we have also, I would say, improved our understanding what is needed to sustainable goals, as things, of course, have evolved, but also, and I think we'll come to that later in the discussion, the global context changed. So again, in a nutshell, let me maybe stress really briefly a few, I think it's important elements of this new strategy. This is now on the table, and I think I have mainly 4 points on that one. My first remark would be on transition. We have realized, I think, in our lessons learned also from 2018, that the transition aspect is a very important one. It certainly requires unprecedented efforts from all, as I said, but we have also seen more and more that the transition pathways of economic actors will possibly have to vary quite considerably. We will have different starting points, different business strategies, and we have to combine them in a way that all these pathways that need to be done should, in the end, ultimately be consistent with our EU sustainable goals. And therefore, we came to the conclusion that we need a bit more a supportive framework to address also the challenge of financing interim steps to this transition. Secondly, we have realized that we could be a bit more inclusive, for example, by defining and promoting the uptake of green loans, green mortgages by small and medium-sized enterprises, but also more by private households to give them the right tools and incentives. Of course, the situation is different if you compare to big companies. Third, is that we think we need to be more active to improve the financial sector's resilience. I think we all know that the sustainable risks are material and they have already producing these adverse effects. But we feel that in the end, we have to make our players, in particular, let's say banks, insurance, a bit more fit for purpose in order to give also the supervisors the tools at hand that the risks are adequately managed. And I think the stress testing is something that is definitely necessary in this context. Last but not least, Europe, the European Union is not an island, is not in isolation. So we also need, in our view, put a bit more of attention to the fact that we have facing a global challenge. The markets are global. So that means also that sustainable finance must be global, and we cannot do this in splendid European isolation. So there are a number of activities, and I think we'll come to that later in our discussion, where we need to be a bit more active to speed up. Just one example, I think we have with the International Platform on Sustainable Finance, certainly one, but of course not the only mechanism to do that. So this is certainly important also for our low and middle income partner countries that, in our view, deserve a particular focus of attention. So that was rather quickly a very rough overview. Of course, I'm happy to take more questions. So to conclude, I think we can be quite satisfied what has been done. We have put things in motion, but it's certainly also true that we are not yet ready, that we need sometimes a bit more, I would say, targeted action to meet the goals. So with that, I stop here, and I hope it was the right mix to kick off our important discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. Indeed, it was a great overview, the confines of the Sustainable Finance Action Plan that the Commission put together. So we have the borderlines of the attempt here to promote sustainable finance. I have a number of questions for you, but we come back to that. One question to think about is the green bond, and how would that be implemented? But perhaps before you give us a little bit more insights on the green bonds, I'd like to turn to Alberto and give him the opportunity to do two things effectively. First, to react to what you've heard from the action plan of the Commission, and of course tell us what NL is doing to progress on the sustainable finance path.
Okay, thank you, and good morning to you all, and thank you for inviting us. So I'm talking with two voices in this discussion. On one side of multinational companies. Multinational company with the solid roots in Europe, but working all around the world. So with big activities in Latin America, big activities in the United States, in Russia, in Asia, in Africa, So we are in more than 30 countries. And on the second, by my role of co-lead of United Nations Global Compact CFO Task Force, that is grouping 60 multinational company CFOs. And we are working on so exactly three things. So the strategy towards the SDG realization, sustainable finance that will help the transition, and reporting and financial disclosure to the market, the way in which sustainability is changing the business model, profitability, and way to work of multinational companies. When it comes, so I hear from Sander from the Europe so today we are the leader in so the engine of the world moving towards sustainability. And related to sustainable finance, so I think a couple of important things that are coming out. One is transition is unavoidable. So we are not now talking if the transition will happen or not. We are only talking about how to speed it up. And second, transition for all the economical companies will have to be a business, not only a choice or an imposition, because with this, we do very, very few steps. If we create business model around, we will go ahead and we will change completely. So our business model and the way we work and the way we do economical activities. Next steps will be, today, transition is more stick to a climate challenge. That is the first thing we have to address. But moving towards sustainability will change the way to work in the capitalism way. So you know that today, so we are now discussing around a new world that is the new stakeholder capitalism. That is the next step of sustainability. When it comes to sustainable finance will have to support, financially speaking, all these changes. And in this, I think that the corporation will play a big role. Our experience, so in 2 words, we started to issuing sustainable finance instruments in 2017. And we started with like everyone else, with the only instruments available that was at that time green bonds. We shift away green bonds in 2019 for a specific reason, that so green bonds are stick to single project, and single project and taxonomy is the way Europe is developing sustainability. That is good, but it's not enough. In fact, the size of sustainable finance market is not absolutely enough to finance the transition. So in different way and different instruments will have to be created, and we'll have to compose a big portfolio, like investments will have to be big and bigger to finance this transition. We invented, let me pass this word in 2019, the sustainable linked bonds. And today it is a market of more than 70 billion euros and is expanding. Philosophically speaking, this new instruments is based on the fact that we found ourselves not to be stick to a specific project, because our strategy, our business model is based on sustainability. So we did prefer to offer financial instruments linked to target, to a specific target that we will reach. And because of this, we got a discount at the issuance of our instruments, and we are ready to pay a step up in our interest rates if we miss the target. Why we think that these instruments for us and for other companies at a certain level of development will be better? Because it will better finance the transition, because it's more inclusive, because everyone can issue these instruments if have a specific target of improvement in their, pollution or all the sustainability targets that may have. And on the other side, because for the first time we can link our business model to a financial instruments. If you go towards projects, is not for a corporation, is not verified that a specific project is your business model. And in fact, some last research are saying that 60% of companies issuing in bonds have not sustainable business model. We think that at this time we have to move towards companies that have sustainable business model at the core of their strategy and not single projects here and there. That's why we were already there. So we tried to have and to find an instrument that was in line with where our strategy was, and we invented these instruments. And I think that now the market of these instruments is big, because 70 billion euros in 2 years is a big market, and is helping the sustainable finance. At the very beginning, we had no standardization of CMA, and now we had ECB not buying this kind of bonds on the purchasing program of the ECB. Now the ECB is buying this kind of instruments, and is also doing what I think is relevant for my second hat, as also Alexander said. So we are not an island in Europe. So we need to harmonize the way in which all the world will approach. And I think an holistic way to do it, grouping together so a specific instruments that will finance specific efforts on one side, moving towards the fact that the SDG strategy is based on targets, taxonomy is based on projects, and to try to find a way how project and targets may stay together, and all the financial instruments together will bring help to this in growing the size of sustainable finance, is the way we have all together so endorse, because the only thing we have to do all together is to rush, because only rushing and increasing investments and doing the right things will address the challenge we are living, and we know we all are living this challenge for us and for our sons. That is today the climate change and the climate challenge, and then other steps to move to a different way, to a different concept of capitalism.
Thank you very much, Alberto. The very interesting initiatives. Perhaps we could come back to them. And so, also in the second round, maybe you could comment a little bit on what you heard from Alexander on the initiatives coming from the Commission. Are they sufficient? Do they rush sufficiently to create the market that you talked about? But perhaps we can first hear from Pierre, and then we can come back to that if that's okay with you. Pierre, we've heard it. It's a very small market. We need to rush. The climate change is it's here to stay. I spent the whole summer running away from fires in Greece. So, as the climate change, you see it in real time. It's not something theoretical, right? So, how do we rush, as we heard here from the corporate sector, but also from Alexander's comments? How do we create the market? What's the role of the public sector and of development banks, of any banks in facilitating that?
So thank you very much for obviously inviting us also to this virtual roundtable, and I'm very happy obviously to be in Brussels also physically. All we talk about is creating markets. And by the way, the EBRD as an institution has been built to create markets and to ensure transition. By the way, a few years ago, I was struck when joining the bank that transition was considered old-fashioned. Nobody was using transition, and I think the concept of a path towards something which is sustainable is, in a way, an extremely modern idea. And not a discovery for EBRD, because also, in a way, sustainability was enshrined in the treaty, creating EBRD in its articles, and with a lot of foresight. In fact, shareholders 30 years ago, in a completely different context, thought that sustainability, transition, and market creation were key elements to bring systemic change. Not only a little bit more of money, not a little bit more of wealth, which is obviously important, but also transform societies, economies, business models. And I think that's really something which is at the core of any answer to the biggest challenge, which has been confirmed again and again by all the reports of IPCC. The last one, obviously, over the summer just updates what we know, and the size of the challenge, the speed of the changes which are required. And I think here the EU, which is often criticized for being too slow, being too shy, being too, I think really showed leadership. And it's probably the area where, at least in the last 5 or 10 years, the EU has been really in the front seat, and has been developing through many initiatives. And I think what has been done in the financial field has been really innovative and really driving a lot of innovation. This platform for sustainable finance, which published the draft EU taxonomy, is just one extremely important example. And I think also one addition to that is bringing different actors around the table, not only ministries of environment, not only ministries of finance, but central banks, private sector. And I think that the strength of the initiative which have been launched, multilateral development banks, and development banks have a special role in that, by, together with public authorities and the European Commission, participating in setting standards, because obviously markets will only look at potentially investing money if they know that you can trust on the standards which are more or less developed, to create a real market which inspire that. And this is fundamental if we want to leverage private sector money. It's really our bread and butter, in the climate space, where I will say a few words about the amounts we invested in the last years, but I think in simple terms, in €1 we invest, we attract more or less, we mobilize €5 from other actors, private investors or other investors. This is really important to build on that, to build on the capacity to mobilize private sector money, and I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to discuss about ways to do that. This is also very much in line with our own priorities, which are very much about green, inclusion, and digital. By the way, the three dimensions are in a way quite interlinked, because inclusion and inequalities are also very much linked to the path you take to low carbon transition, and that's where justice or just transition plays its part to make it socially acceptable. As I said, this path is not new for us, because we've started to launch our Green Economy Transition Initiative in 2016, but it is very much now deployed with an increased strength, also for political reasons. As you know, we have core EU shareholding, a majority of our capital, but also the United States in our shareholding, and that the change also in position from the US allowed more or less EBRD in the last annual meeting to take very ambitious commitment in terms of aligning all our activities by the end of next year to the Paris Agreement, but also committing ourselves to a target of 50% of all our investment by 2025 in that space. So that's really about the frame. How we do that around more or less the 2000 project we finance in this green space. We do it through many different ways, but very much using concessional funding coming from the European budget, but also other sources in leveraging also what we do on our own balance sheet. I could give examples in the eastern neighborhood, using also the new instruments which will be massively increased in the next MFF, EFSD Plus or Global Europe, which are these two of guarantees which can allow us to provide first loss cover for private financiers, but also very much build on what we are also already proposing in countries which are generally very far from countries in Western Europe, countries which are very carbon intensive, countries which in fact are very vulnerable to climate change, but also countries which generally don't have the capacity to implement these objectives. And I think we've done, we have a network of something like 130 banks in all our countries of operation. We do generally regularly polls with them, and they all say climate change is a very important, and climate finance is a fundamental issue, but we are not equipped also to manage and to transform more or less this objective in something where more or less our own operations are assessed against benchmarks of more or less climate consistency, or which is linked to disclosure, which has been mentioned just before. And there, institutions like us, we try obviously to support them through technical assistance, through policy advice, around how you can equip yourself to be part of this transition, working also with ministries of finance, but also central banks, to have the right supervisory framework, which allows more or less to take into account this risk, but also to incentivize local actors to take these risks also as opportunities to create more trust with the co-investors in the project. So I think these are very much the different dimensions which are crucial, both to accelerate the trend, to make it more acceptable. So as I mentioned, justice or just transition is quite fundamental, and not working only on investment flows, which obviously is a matter of activity for a bank, but also on the policy framework, which is indispensable to create trust and to create markets at the end.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Pierre, for this. I see questions are coming into this. I will try and weave them into a discussion. But let me give our panelists the opportunity to react to some of the comments. Perhaps we can start with you, Alexandra. And on the one hand, and I definitely agree with Pierre that Europe has really shown leadership when it comes down to advancing the green agenda. Just the taxonomy, just the idea of putting it down in words, how to classify green assets. In that already is a big thing. But on the other hand, we hear it also from Alberto that we need to rush. There is a very small market. How do you advance green bonds? And give us an example of how to mobilize the private sector in concrete ways that is going to help to speed up the process.
Maria, thank you very much, and also thank you to my co-panelists, because first of all, I think we all more or less on the same page. This maybe somehow some different nuances. I mean, what I perhaps would like to say also a bit with regard to your first comment and what Alberto said about what is green. I think that is also certainly in the end an important question in this overall context. I think we all agree that there is now, I mean, of course there is the need to do that, and there is also a lot of appetite because this is also not only good for the environment, but there is also a good economic opportunity. Therefore, from our perspective, and that's also coming back to your question on the green bonds, I think this is something we have to make sure in Europe, but also beyond, that what is issued as green investments is really green. And I mean, this is this famous discussion about the greenwashing. I think for us it was important, and you can see this across the board, that all the mechanisms we do, nobody is forced to use the taxonomy, and nobody is, in the end, if the green bond proposal of the Commission goes through, to use to green bonds. But if you do that, if you do this on a voluntary basis, then you have to stick to the rules. And I think there it is important that there is the definition of what is green, which is very much aligned in what we will have in the taxonomy. So let's say which kind of investments are a significant contributor to our objectives, and at the same time do not get put significant harm to other elements, that this is somehow the fil rouge in all the investments. And there, of course, we need also some monitoring and control mechanisms. And I think this is something we would indeed, with the green bonds, there will always be, according to our proposal, at least an external reviewer who will have to be accredited and to be able to check. And of course, the role of the European supervisory authorities, in particular ESMA, will also be very important. I think this is not also only something that would apply is in the European Union, but and I fully agree with what Pierre was saying. I mean, I think we have to try as much as we can to also use our system somehow in the external parts of the world, without maybe, of course, taking into consideration some specifications. I don't think we will be able to say, okay, we have now the taxonomy in the European Union. This is the gold standard. Everybody has to apply it in the same way. I mean, we want to do it in the EU. I think we can do that. We have a strong economic sector, but we may need to take this as a sort of example and then modulate it in a way that other regions in the world can at least start in developing their policies along that lines.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. Can I come then to Alberto? And I have really two questions for you, Alberto. The first one is, how is this, Sustainable Finance Action Plan put by the Commission an enabler for you to go down the path of sustainable financing? What would you like them to do more, and what do you think is really not enabling you in this capacity? And then the second question, and here I would like to also put in a question that is coming from Laurent Bonneau, is really, I was intrigued by your initiative on the instrument, on tying the bonds to targets, and if you don't meet your targets, to pay a premium on that. And it links very nicely to the question, because he's asking whether environmental risk is sufficiently taken into account in projects. Is it well priced? I mean, the risk premium that you say you're paying, how do you price that? Obviously, in a creation of a market, it's crucially important to price things. What is this risk premium you will be charged, and is it sufficient?
Well, so thank you for the first question. I say that we look with very interest. So the EU new sustainable finance strategy. So now it's the first step of discussion, but we think that is in the right way. So in the way I said before, so to have now the green bond standards have been issued to start another way of thinking and to have another leg that will be so defined through the new sustainable finance strategy, that so is also aiming at discussing new and different financial instruments, because one of the points is exactly that, and so the aim to extend the framework, so also to add a transition bond like the sustainable in bonds. And others, I say, other way on also on risk and on a more inclusive sustainable finance framework. And so all the step of this new strategy is very interesting because it's clear that, so as I said before, we have to have different instruments for different companies at different degrees of development of their sustainable activities or sustainable strategy. And so we have to gather all the companies in an effort to this transition and to change so the way the companies will work. Because the very point we are discussing is exactly this. So we can start in having some actions on sustainability, but sooner or later we will see that is the only way in the future to do business. And so to do this is not only to do some projects, is to completely rethink the way the companies act, the companies work, and the companies do business. And this is an effort that we all together we have to do. When it comes to the second question, well, so I think, and it's relevant also in the EU strategy, that a better way to define risk and opportunities into the financial instruments will have to be, so at the end, done by, I say, who today is doing this. We are talking with the rating agencies to ask why they are lagging behind in incorporating the risk, the sustainable risk and climate risk, and also the opportunities in their judgment. Today, rating agencies are doing two things. One, they are judging in the old way companies. And secondly, they are adding a leg of ESG that are taking separate of the judgment of the credit risk. It's not more the time to do this. Because if today you issue a bond that will last 10 years, in 10 years, the world will be different. And in 10 years, so the first things, and the first question you have to have, if the business the company is relying on will exist. That's the first question. Not if in the last 3 years you had a very, very good financial ratings. So you have to move towards. And that's why we issued a sustainable linked bond based on our strategy, and we got a discount versus our normal bond. We got 20, 30 basis point discount. Why this is strange? Why if I link an instrument to my sustainable target, the market is giving me a discount? Because I show that this strategy is my strategy to last and to be profitable and to be less risky in the future. That's why market is giving me a discount. And exactly this kind of discount or risk, so higher risk for other activities, will have to be included in the credit judgments of the rating agencies. It's the only way to improve sustainable finance. Because at that time, we will not discuss about what is sustainable or not. And we will come back to the normal finance. If you are profitable and less risky, you will get money to a lower level of cost. Because today we are discussing about sustainability. I hope that in 10 years we will not anymore, because everything will be sustainable. So we will not have any needs to define sustainability. Like today, we have no needs to define our economical activities of yesterday. Now we are in a transition. Transition will have to end, and everything will be back to normal with all these things and all this stuff included in strategies, credit judgments, financial instruments, and so on and so forth.
Interesting. So I take the credit rating as a good, very concrete suggestion for sustainable, to include sustainable characteristics on the credit rating. I think that's a very interesting suggestion, and coming from the cohorts. I think it's crucial to point that out. Thank you very much, Alberto. I'd like to turn back to Pierre. There's a few questions that are coming here that I'd like to combine and ask you. There is one question that I will ask. I wish I didn't have to ask, but I will ask it. And that is that, is sustainable finance becoming just another catchphrase? So is there a risk of this being a hype and therefore not moving in concrete ways? I mean, what is your take on that? But also I'd like to ask a question that Mathieu Métivier is asking. And here I think there is an important element. And given that the EBRD, you have a variety of countries, I think it would be appropriate for you. How can we ask developing economies to be sustainable without preventing them from being successful?
So first, is it more or less just a fashion, or is it an easy way to escape difficult discussion? Maybe I think what we see is at the same time really a revolution, obviously not in every places, and the remark which has been done just before about adjustment of behaviors of the different stakeholders, starting by rating agencies, I think maybe too slow and will, but I think this revolution is in a way in the making. So I would say that it's the more you have the interlinkages between these different stakeholders who see the reality in the same way and push more the private sector, the consumers and the companies more or less in the same direction, the better. And I think this is happening also under a huge international pressure and mobilization. What I think is still missing is often the capacity to put that in concrete plans, in concrete roadmaps by the different actors. And that's why I think it requires not only commitment, wish, willingness, but also capacity at national level to define these low carbon pathways at macro level, but also sector by sector, understanding also the transformation in each sector that it requires, also the trade-offs which are implied in that, the things, the assets which will completely lose their values over the next 5 years or 10 years, and being able to anticipate this transformation. And that, I think, is lacking still at national level in many countries where we operate, but also in the financial sector. And I think the scrutiny, other actors, which are as rating agencies, but also institutional investors, pension funds, which try to look at opportunities to find reliable places to put the money, which obviously pensioners care, and young people, by the way, will be pensioners in the future, care very much about where the money will go. I think these are really elements which should transform the system around the standards, disclosure, transparency, which is indispensable to create a real market, but also support to the actors to make it happen. So I think that's a very important dimension. The second question was on...
how can we ask developing economies to be sustainable?
Yes, is there a trade-off? I think in a way, this question has been brought to the forefront also because of the corona crisis, because much attention in the last 18 months has been very much about trying to find the right answer to the economic shock of the pandemic crisis. We see, at least in countries, some governments and some companies which have been only focused on that. And by the way, considering that climate change was something which was more for the long term, more costly in terms of response, I think this is not true in the majority of cases. Also because companies see very much the long-term capacity also to be profitable, that their activity meets also demand, depend on also the capacity for themselves to adjust their model. So I think the question is very much that the crisis in a way increases inequalities So makes also this distributional issues linked to the low carbon transition even more acute, but in fact more pressing. And I think there is this awareness that it's not either or, it's not either competitiveness or having a sustainable development, but it's obviously linked. And I think what we are trying to do, like other actors, is very much to help making this adjustment as painless as possible, and to support the actors to do that, also to equip them with the capacity to handle this transition.
But there is a point in this, right? And there is even China who is delaying its, by comparison to the rest of the world, China is delaying its commitments to reach the targets, similar targets, simply based on this development argument that the right to develop will have an environmental cost. And it's a compelling argument, but it's one that runs against the DNA of this panel and against the objectives of Europe, which the climate change is real, but the burden of adjustment cannot be disproportionate, or it won't happen. It's not to our interest to have a disproportionate burden, you see. And then actually there is this social aspect, and the inequality aspect comes also from another question, and I think this is directed more to you, Alexander. It comes from Wilfred Remens, who is asking, what is the status of integrating social aspects in the new sustainable finance frameworks? I think you're muted, Alexandra.
Now it should work.
Yeah.
Now that is, I think, a very valid question. It is certainly true that we have a lot of problems on our plate, and as we have, I think everybody agrees, the one in tackling climate change is certainly pressing, although 2050 seems far away. But indeed, that should not lead us to the conclusion that social sustainability is something that is also sort of luxury. And what I can say is that we have this very much on our radar screen. There is also something in our new strategy I have just referred to. But it's also not an easy subject, to be very honest with you. I think we need to, socially is large. I mean, what is in the end social aspect that should be taken into account if you do an investment? And I think there we need, in the end, if you want to do something, and I think we have an interest in looking into that, find the right balance in doing more on social, especially often when products are produced outside the European Union. I mean, this is a bit sad, but still a fact. But in a way that the company can also cope with that. And I think there we simply need to better understanding and how to get that. I mean, we have tasked the platform that was already mentioned, I think, by Pierre, that is assisting us very strongly in all our scientific assessments of the policies we do. We have also tasked the platform to look into that. The platform has also issued very recently a public consultation on social aspects in the taxonomy. I think we are reaching the final dates of this consultation. I think it ends on the 6th, so if anybody thinks he or she would still contribute, please do so. And we will collect that, and on that basis we will look what is, let's say, what could we do, what is more difficult to do, perhaps how we can do it in stages. So I have to be a bit generic today, but to reassure the one who has asked the question, we have this on our radar screen, but of course, if we do that, we need to do that in the right way, that we find the good balance.
Thank you very much. I'm aware of the time, so let me get to one more question. My colleague, Alexander Lehmann, and I think this is more for you, Pierre, is asking the following question. Does the elaborate EU framework foster or hinder climate finance flows to emerging markets where investment needs are greatest and immediate?
I think they don't hinder. The question is, I think also the initiatives which are progressing, like the carbon adjustment mechanism, which will be obviously potentially a very powerful instrument also in this transition, but at the same time is creating a lot of concerns in the countries we cover, obviously, where export to the European market is really an important engine of the economic system. I think this requires probably also dealing with the question about how we can use some of the resources linked to such a mechanisms for development purposes and for supporting these countries to be part of the same train, more or less, and going in the same direction, which is set for EU countries. And I think what Alexandra mentioned is very important. There is a link between, obviously, the very high ambition we set for the countries inside the EU, and also the capacity to bring along also countries which are in the neighborhood. Because if you don't have central banks, ministries of finance, private sector actors, which are ready, in fact, to participate to the same, more or less, journey, we'll have more or less the same problem we have in other areas of divergence between the EU and its immediate neighborhood, the Balkans, Turkey, countries which obviously are very important for us, and very important also for social political reasons, because for example, all the studies, academic studies about migration show that also climate is and will be an increasing element which push people to move and to knock at the doors of other countries. So I think this dimension is really important, how you can first at the domestic level handle the social implication of this transformation. This is just transition. This is also how you can support retraining, reskilling, looking at new economic models to be deployed in the next 5 or 10 years. And also the second aspect is how you bring along also countries which are in the vicinity of Europe very much along the same path.
Yeah. So I think maybe I can squeeze in one question actually that I'd like to pose, given that we have Alexandra here from DG FISMA. It relates to Capital Markets Union, because I think that's an important part of the conversation. Climate change is a fact, but climate risks are very much unknown, and we don't have the right developed markets to do that. We don't price risk. We don't have a carbon price. So effectively we need financing means that can evaluate risks and take risks. And in Europe, we don't have very developed markets that can do that. Isn't the urgency for finding other means and advancing the CMU agenda all the more bigger as a result of our climate goals?
I think we are running out of time, and I think my answer can be quite short. I think, our goal also to create a capital markets union and to address climate change is exactly the same objective we need to achieve. We have a number of initiatives to foster the capital market union, and what we have discussed now over this 1 hour is certainly also something that will contribute heavily to making access to capital in the European Union easier than we have it before. So I think I can be quite brief in your answer, saying this is certainly very much in the same box.
Thank you very much for that. And Alberto, any final thoughts?
Yeah, for me, it's very, very useful and so very inspiring. So I think that we are all so in the same effort, and so it's I think it's relevant that the discussion among us, among all other countries all around the world will bring this new model in place very soon. I think Europe is the leading force in these times of this effort. I think that in this, we are also getting a a technological and experienced advance that today into in the future will bring Europe to be, I hope, on the center of the new economic concept of the world. And it's relevant, but it is also relevant to gather all the others and to hear and to understand where the others are, and to create instruments and concepts that can gather everyone in this effort.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And Pierre, any final thoughts?
No, not something completely new. I think building on what has been just said, I think looking at this transformation as a huge opportunity, economic opportunity, is very important. The President of the United States very much stressed the fact that it was a huge opportunity for the American economy. I think this is the case also, obviously, for Europe, but it is the case in many of the countries where we operate, which are in the neighborhood. And I think this awareness, this understanding, but also the support which can be brought to this transformation are very important also to make it appealing, politically acceptable, because also governments are elected, so wants to be sure that what they are doing at the end will be transformed into a result they wish to see, and that requires a lot of collective efforts. And when I see what has been done also by the Commission, Valdis Dombrovskis also in his in the previous mandate, bringing along actors who were completely not talking about climate change and not really being involved in practical terms. Central banks were very far. You can say also even at the European level, this awareness transformation is quite recent. It shows also that minds are changing quite rapidly in all companies I see, but also in different parts of national authorities which were not very much part of this discussion until recently. So that should lead to quite a lot of optimism also.
And that's a very nice point to finish on an optimistic note. I hope you can join us next year and tell us about visible progress on the markets and beyond, on regulation and beyond, and promoting the issue. But I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us from your busy schedules. It's been a real delight hosting you. And thank you all for participating and sending questions. That's all we have time for today. See you next time. Thank you very much.